Hi, everybody. I think Craig Bot just kicked off. Welcome to another Treasury Tuesday. Today is March 28th, 2023. It's been a wild couple of weeks, as we all know here, both at Rook and as the market at large. I posted the agenda in the chat above, as well as the updates channel. So I encourage you guys all to go ahead and check that out and follow along. As always, there is a wealth of information and backlinks and everything that'll kind of support what we'll be talking about. So if you need a little bit more information about any of those topics, you can definitely find it there. So with that being said, we'll be following the same structure as we typically do. So we'll start out with recent events and news as it relates to the industry at large, as well as like what we have going on here. And then we'll get into a little bit more collaboration, and then we'll finally end things off with the open floor section as always. So let's go ahead and dive on in. And as always, if anybody has any questions, concerns, or just wants to elaborate a little bit more on a particular topic, feel free to stop me as always and chime in. So this first section is going to be chock full of legal updates, as we're all aware of. So I guess the first thing that was probably one of the bigger pieces of news was that Coinbase actually was issued a Wells notice. So, I'm not going to get into the details of what that is and really what that means because I'm not truly qualified. But, my understanding of this is that there really is no actual action taken from this. This is more of something that precedes a potential enforcement action. This is kind of the SEC's way of signaling that they will be investigating certain aspects of it. And so I think that they'll be looking into their staking program as well as their listing process as well, and lots of other things. But, it's definitely pretty sad news considering Coinbase, I think, was in the SEC like 30 times over the past year or something like that. So you definitely check that out. The other thing we saw from a legal front was SushiSwap received a subpoena, or maybe I should say Jared Gray, their CEO, received a subpoena, and they have subsequently set up or trying to set up a legal defense fund in the amount of like $3 million or something like that. So pretty interesting. We also, and this is pretty recent as well, we also saw the CFTC go after Binance for a litany of different potential offenses. So I encourage you guys to look at that. Again, I could list those here, but there's a lot of them. But one thing that was kind of interesting that came out of that was the CFTC classified ETH and Bitcoin as commodities, which has been their stance for the whole time, or at least it has been their stance for a good long time, which obviously contrasts the SEC's classification of at least ETH as a security. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Also, we saw Do Kwon was arrested, so maybe that's some good news. A little bit staying in the legal front, but yeah, we'll see how that one shakes out from a due process standpoint. The other last thing from a legal standpoint was we saw that Justin Sun and Tron are being investigated by the SEC, I believe, for market manipulation as well as some other potential offenses. So all these things kind of came out fairly close to each other, so it definitely, in my opinion, seems fairly coordinated, but to some degree, but maybe not. That's speculation on my end. And then maybe finishing up this section with some good news, potentially is we actually saw Euler. I think about 50 last time when I was filling out this agenda. I think about 50% of those funds that were hacked previously have been returned, and I believe there's some crazy stuff going on there. I haven't been paying attention closely, so if anybody has been paying attention to that scenario, would love if you chimed in, gave me a little bit more insight there. But maybe I'll pause there. I think that was everything from a general crypto news and event standpoint to kind of run through. Does anybody else have any more information about any of these, or would like a little bit more elaboration? Easy enough? Cool. Well, go ahead and moving into the macro section of just the events and news section. We saw the Fed hike rates about 25 basis points. I think that was be expected for the most part. We've seen a lot of volatility with regards to what the Fed was expecting, and so we kind of see it land there, and it'll be exciting to watch their trajectory moving forward. But definitely check out that article which will outline a little bit more commentary from the Fed about what they see as a path forward. These next other things are definitely very macro, but I wanted to just kind of put them on the radar for people just as general investors or just people who are curious about how it may impact this space and their assets as a whole. One term to be familiar with is called the BTFP, which is the Bank Term Funding Program. I'm sure you've seen a little bit about this, but just definitely be paying attention to its use over the next weeks and months. This program is essentially what the Fed did to step in and provide a little bit more comfort for people who are potentially like considering doing pulling their assets out of a bank, and gives the bank a little bit more comfort to know that they'll be supported in these kind of liquidity crunches or in a bank run. And so what this really does is that if a bank has, let's say, a short-term treasury, a long-durated treasury, up to 1 year, the Fed will recognize that at par, without like letting the bank, and they'll post that collateral to the bank, and allow them to accommodate any like assets that are being withdrawn from the bank. Something else to be paying attention to, or is the central bank liquidity swaps. This is like, I guess, a program that was set up with, I'm going to call friendly other central banks, to just increase liquidity there as well. And then one other thing to just be paying attention to in the macro is just the pivot to money market funds. This could be something that would cause, not a bank run per se, but just an organic flow of funds from depositors to something that's a little bit more high yielding and could exacerbate the situation from a liquidity standpoint for these banks. So again, I know I skimmed over this high level and didn't really get into details, but just please check those out, and it'll make you better investors, I would say, on the whole, and something to be paying attention to. So I'll pause there. Anything else from a macro or crypto standpoint that people wanted to hear about more? Okay. Moving into, I guess, Rook events and news. Obviously, this has been a lot going on here, but I'm just going to run through some of the proposals that we know are pending. I know there's been a lot that's been posted to the forum, so I apologize if I've missed anything in particular. This was kind of set up towards the tail end of yesterday. This agenda, that is. So these first, let's see, 4 to 5 proposals have been up there for a little bit longer, with the last 2 being relatively recent. So I'll go ahead and run through these really fast. So Replenish discretionary investment limit KIP. This is really something we're trying to refill the coffer, so to speak, with regards to what kind of level of discretion we have to move nimbly in the event of a black swan event or something that we need a little bit more speed or confidentiality to move. So we've leveraged this KIP once before, and I think we have about $700,000 left within that balance. And so would just like to explore the replenishment of those funds. And so that one's been sitting there for a while. The next one is similar to some degree in that we're trying to refill and deploy additional capital. So this is essentially this deployment of additional yield or ETH for yield generation. Essentially, we had about 75% of our idle ETH approved to be deployed into the 3 liquid staking products. This KIP is essentially to increase that limit by another 5%, I believe, to 80% of our idle ETH. And again, we had a couple other rebalances that increased our ETH position overall. And so this would allow us to, again, just capture a little bit more yield off of our financial positions. The next one is expand the funding and testing of strategies and testing wallet. So right now we have about $600,000 that's been allocated to a segregated testing wallet where we are swapping stable coins and essentially capturing the MEV on top and using this to capture more data, potentially create products around this. And again, we've talked to other protocols who all find this pretty exciting and would love to just kind of explore that even more. So what this KIP is requesting is for additional funds, which is another $400,000, and then it would also allow us to engage in other strategies that are not one-for-one price swaps between stablecoins. So this would not only allow us to potentially capture more revenue, capture more data, but it would also allow us to protect ourselves in the event of a depegging situation for some asset. The next one is the Treasury yield management for USDC via USV. So this is out of the Future protocol. They would like us to deploy some capital there. So I encourage everybody to check out that. And then I know this one has also been sitting for a while, and it's as similar as the USV, except it's with Origin dollar. And so trying to get a little bit more yield off of our stable coins with that protocol. And I see that Peter is here. So hi, Peter. So I encourage everybody to check out that one as well. And then getting into these last 2 KIPs, we could definitely get into these however people see fit in the initiative and collaboration section. This first one is the dissolution of the DAO. Encourage everybody to check that one out. And then we also have one by Rizo, which is the Rook DAO acquisition of Rook. So this is essentially a buyback program. So dissolution is the DAO would be totally dissolved, and I believe my understanding is that the Treasury would be pro-ratably distributed amongst the Rook token holders. So I think that's the TLDR for at least that one. And again, we can definitely explore this one or any others more into the initiative and collaboration section. Okay, lots of talking there. Maybe I'll pause. Does anybody have anything they'd like to elaborate? Anything they'd like to explore more with any of these proposals that are pending? Okay. Well, I guess we'll move into the last section of the recent events and news section. Proposals that have passed, the swapping of like-kind assets. This passed unanimously. This KIP essentially allows us to bifurcate our process for when we're doing anything with certain assets that are like-kind in nature. So as an example, this KIP allows us, our multi-sig, to have discretion over how they rebalance between different stablecoins. So instead of, every time we have to, let's say we want to rebalance from DAI to USDC or something like that, instead of having to go through the full governance process, this would essentially allow our multi-sig signers to quickly do that. And our thinking was that it's highly reversible and very low impact, but also could prevent us from losing a material amount of funds in the case of a depegging event like we saw with USDC. So this was not in place, but we kind of pushed this forward a little bit, and I'm glad we have this in place now because it's definitely a good protectionary mechanism against potential depegging events, because again, we can just kind of swap in and out of stable. So glad to see that one was passed. The next one that we saw was the labs budget request. This is essentially a quarterly request that we always do, from requesting funds from the Treasury to labs to support dues and subscriptions, other operating expenses, and also paying for contractors as well. So that one went through reconciliation and eventually passed. As we saw, I think there weren't any objectives that were posted to the forum, and I don't believe there was any signed objections either for that one. The next one went to reconciliation as well, which is the leadership extension. I believe this one had one objection that was posted to the forum. I do not believe it was signed. But what this is allowing is basically extending leadership's powers to have a little bit more agency, and they have the ability and discretion to, offboard new contributors, onboard new contributors, as well as determine the pay structures that will be leveraged for the actual full-time contributors as well. So again, that one has now been officially adopted after going through reconciliation. Okay, so that was everything from a proposals perspective. Does anybody have anything they'd like to comment on with regards to the proposals, past and pending? Okay. Easy enough. We could definitely get into this, assuming there's time and the passion for anybody. But we've also been, working on this for a long time, but just looking at our stablecoin framework analysis, whatever you want to call it. And I think it's in a little bit more of a position where we can kind of start sharing it. So you can see that being posted. It's called Stablecoins GTS V2. Really, the intent here is we don't want to be just analyzing where we park our assets at the protocol level. We really want to be taking a first principles approach to saying, okay, what stablecoins are we comfortable holding? What are the detailed nuances? Like, if it's a centralized asset or a centralized stablecoin, where are they actually holding that money? Like, how diversified are those banks? How secure are those banks? So those are all things that we've started to explore and will continue to explore, all for the sake of just trying to find stability and trying to make sure that we can really have a very deliberate and comprehensive stablecoin approach. So more to come on this. Definitely a lot more that we can kind of talk through with regards to how do we want our stablecoin composition to look moving forward. I think the USDC depegging, while short-term in nature and potentially resolved now, it still has definitely shined a light on the fact that we really need to start taking action and trying to figure out what the best approach is with regards to our overall treasury composition, but especially stablecoins. So we'd love to explore that with anybody who's interested. Yeah, I think that was everything from the recent events and news section. Again, there's a tremendous amount of resources and links. So if you guys have questions about that, check out the resources. If you're still confused, reach out to 50 or myself or really anybody who you feel comfortable with. And we would be happy to kind of, give our thoughts and insight on it, as well as just relay more information we may or may not have. Great. So I guess that brings us to the initiative collaboration section. For anybody who's kind of new, this is really where we just get into the details of, some initiative, some idea, something that we feel like is a worthwhile opportunity for us to explore as a community. So obviously we could talk about a lot of different things, as it relates to DAO dissolution, to buyback programs, to improving the token model. I know we've had that post as well. But what I thought would be a good start, and again, this is open to really everybody here, is just kind of talking a little bit more about Incubator DAO. And I know there's been some, what I would perceive as positive movement. Again, this is just my opinion, positive movement on that front, especially as with regards to Tedward's comments, which I've linked here. So didn't know if people want to start there. I don't. Tedward, is he here? No, he's not here. But maybe I'll just start there. Does anybody have anything that they'd like to say about the incubator DAO concept, or any of the traction that's been kind of moved forward on that front? No, somebody has thoughts here. Been posted all over Discord. AZ or Hazard, do you guys have anything you'd like to throw out there with regards to any kind of movement here?
Sure. I don't have anything too much to say other than that I think I appreciate all of the really great work that a lot of people have been doing and brainstorming and thinking to come up with, frameworks and compromise solutions and stuff like that. Not all of the frameworks, as are things that, I think whenever we build or anybody builds a framework, we're really just trying to find, excuse me, sort of a rational basis for, making choices. And so that's usually, it's really good to see. And that's what things like DAOs are actually pretty good at. And we've seen this in the past too. It can be sort of traumatic at first, but then once things get down and into the details like that and people start to engage on that level, it actually becomes kind of an interesting process. So I think we've started turning that corner with some of these questions now, which has been really, really great. So yeah, without commenting too much on like the substance of everything that's been posted so far, I don't necessarily want to super like bias all of that. I think it's just been great to work with people on building these kinds of rationales, because ultimately those are the activities that lead to actual action being happening. And I know there's folks who have joined the DAO fairly recently, and when we talk about crowd consensus, right? This is exactly what crowd consensus looks like. We are currently in the process of forming crowd consensus about these kinds of questions. We didn't have it before. We didn't have it last week or over the weekend, and we still don't have it exactly, but we're getting there. And this is what it looks like when that crowd consensus starts to come together. And once there's a reasonable degree of, agreement that this looks, like this looks good, or this looks like it could satisfy most people, that's when the matter then gets sent into a SOFON review so that they can look at the details and the particulars and see to that. But yeah, I just welcome everybody to the DAO, and I'm glad for those who have really engaged with this in the last couple of days to kind of discover everybody's talents and skills. And having these discussions become more productive has been great. So
great. Well, before I kind of ask some more pointed questions and kind of force you guys to talk a little bit more, does anybody just have any general thoughts that they'd like to get out there about, that proposal or really any of these proposals? Again, I'm happy pivoting to talk about some other idea or proposal that's been pitched if somebody prefers.
Yeah, I'd just really quickly like to piggyback off of Hazard's point there. I've personally, it's been really good to see people start to make articulated counter proposals. That's really good. Even if I don't have to agree with them, or nobody has to agree with them necessarily, but just purely by itself, the fact that they are articulated very well and put forward concise points is a massive step forward in the right direction. So that's been really good to see.
Yeah, another general comment I would have is, regardless of how I feel or 50 feels, or really anybody on the Treasury side may feel, we're here to support, whatever kind of initiative or idea that somebody has, especially as it comes to drafting a proposal. So if you need data, if you need financial numbers, whatever it takes to kind of get and make your point, and you may not have that information or just not sure where to look for it, reach out. We're here to help and kind of help you kind of fill those gaps, because again, we want to make sure there's sufficient data in any of these proposals get kind of brought to the table. So just throwing that out there as well. But yeah, I guess assuming people want to talk a little bit more about what Tedward has put out and kind of the updates on this new front. Maybe I'll just start with the high level. It looks like there's a cash split of about 55% to the new DAO and 45% to labs. So would be curious to just like a gut check if anybody has any general thoughts about that, whether that is, appealing to them or if they feel like it's a completely wrong approach. Nobody has any thoughts about that? Okay.
I have a question.
Sure, go for it.
So I think like the hardest part about this is like the value of the technology, I guess, because like the community doesn't really have like any idea of like what that looks like. Do you guys have any like revenue projections or anything of like the next 5 years, so then we can be easier to figure out?
Yeah, that's a great point because there was so I think right now the state, for anybody who hasn't been following on the thread, the state is that there's agreement because over the last week we disagreed about a lot of stuff, but I think we can all agree that the new DAO will be giving up governance control of the tech. And so what is that? What is the value of having governance over the tech is the question. And so there is some ideas for how to do this simply. You could just make an assumption about the value of the tech and you could discount that by the probability that revenue could be shared with token holders one day. That's really gets kind of messy. And another way you could do it, and I like this idea, main event, and I actually thought about that. Maybe we could do that. Would be to look at if we have any internal projections for revenue under different scenarios, and then discount that by the probability that would be shared by token holders. Which again, I mean, that would be a simplifying assumption. We'd have to make a reasonable agreement among parties about what that probability is. Obviously there's no data for that. But I think I was already going to see if we could pull some of that out, some of those projections, just to have an additional data point. Because ideally what we have is it's not relying on one particular methodology and it's just resting on that. Ideally there's some kind of confluence that sort of adds up and it sort of makes sense. So I think it would be a good idea to take a look at some of those models and projections that we might have and just see, are those even in the same ballpark as what is being discussed today? Because if they're not, then there's a problem. And we can, obviously we commit to being very transparent about that as much as, noting again that it's hard to see the future. And so these would only be models or projections, but I think we could do something like that. I don't want us to get too in the weeds, but I think that would be good to have some kind of ballpark figure and help out with some of this other discussion. So yeah, that's a great point.
All right, thanks. Yeah, because I guess like you guys could just, no one, would anyone from the community be able to see, like?
Oh yeah. We'd have to share it. Yeah, we definitely share it.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
We wouldn't just be like, yeah, it looks good. No, yeah, we'd share it.
Cool. Anybody else have any thoughts or comments about that proposal?
Just on the projection front, would you be able to provide what all the inputs are and sort of the rationale for the inputs?
Yes.
I'm a little bit concerned that
absolutely.
You guys.
There's actually. I'm so sorry. You go ahead.
Yeah, it might be quite difficult for us to project or to try and recreate your work just without all that information.
Absolutely. So yeah, and again, so we have a lot of new members in the DAO. So we actually, in the past, I think in the quarter 3 2022 report, the quarterly report, we published some. Maybe it was quarter 2. We published some very basic data sets that you could use to think about revenue, potential future revenue. This would be, protocol revenue, and this depends on many factors and pricing and stuff. But that model, we could share that, take a look at that, and just kind of huddle around that. And again, because there's so many unknowns with this. Even when we do it, there's a lot of unknowns, but we can show you everything that we do know and then kind of try to make I think the basic idea for these is like, let's make sure we're not off by orders of magnitude somewhere, right? It won't be perfect, but I think it would be good to have that additional layer just to have something else to talk about and talk through. So yeah, absolutely. So we can show you the inputs, we can show you how it is arrived at. Yeah, it's not too hard.
I think it'd be good to see that and then just compare that to some of the numbers that have been thrown out. contribute to proposal and see if it sort of sticks up. So thank you.
Yeah, totally.
Right. So, anybody else have anything they'd like to say about that?
Not about that exactly, but one thing that I thought we would see but haven't really seen much of yet is people kind of stepping up to take a part in the new DAO. You know, it's whatever the eventual figure that we land upon is, it's a pretty sizable amount of capital, so it's going to need to be managed by a team and everything. And currently we've had, I don't think, any kind of real like people putting their hands up and saying, hey, this would be my plan for the new DAO. This is what I want to do with it. I think there was one guy who mentioned something just like kind of offhand, but yeah. So this is actually something that we're really looking for. You know, there's a lot of good ideas floating around now, and now they're starting to get articulated better. So if you want that chance to implement these, then okay. So if you want the chance to implement these ideas, then the way to do that would be to kind of put your hand up and say, hey, look, I have these ideas for the incubator DAO. I would be willing to put these into effect. So yeah, that's definitely something that we're kind of looking for.
I am definitely interested in throwing my hat in that sort of ring. There's some logistical questions I've got to figure out before I can really lean into a commitment like that. But it is on my radar and a strong contender for my main priority.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a really good opportunity for anyone who really wants to push any of these things forward. I am on record for commenting on the original Incubator DAO post that I think this would be a win-win for both parties, which was a comment that maybe didn't prove too prudent. But my logic behind that was that it was essentially the same thing, that this is a very, very rare opportunity. You know, like even if it is, I don't know, 10 million or whatever, like that's a really, really large amount of capital. Like most startups start with a lot less. So there's really kind of an unbounded amount of things that can be done with this opportunity. So yeah, that's kind of my thinking around it.
Okay. I know we had one comment in the chat by Starfile. I'm just going to read it here. I feel like there is a lack of representation for DAO members that want to remain.
Sorry, yeah, just a quick question for me. How does that new leadership get voted in? Would it be just a vote amongst current Rook holders, or how do you guys envisage the new leadership team to take effect?
So anyone from the governance side of things, please feel free to kind of interject and tell me I'm wrong, but my assumption would be that it would follow the governance standards that are currently outlined already, so funds and token voting, etc. and Snapshot. How I imagine it would go, just from a logistical point of view, is that so first of all, you'd have to kind of get a pool of people who raise their hand and say, okay, I'm interested. After that, there'd be something like job specs and stuff. So like, okay, you're interested, what would be your ideal role? What would you contribute? After that, you'd probably just get like a final selection of people. Let's just say, for example, that there's 10 people who all put their hand up and say, I want to do this role. Once that's kind of finalized, once people have got a rough consensus on that, I imagine that's what would go to the governance as a kind of like an initiation, cementing the new team. I know that's a bit vague, but I hope that kind of sort of answers your question.
Yeah, if I could just jump in on that. Like just to be clear, the idea behind, well, I mean, JZ can speak to this better than I can, but my understanding of the idea behind pointing to continuity in terms of having SOFONs and in terms of having that process is just to have something for the new DAO to be able to stand up as it develops its own approach to these things. So I don't think from the Rook Lab side there's any expectation that this is going to go in any one particular way. It's meant to be a DAO for its members to make those decisions about. So from my perspective, my understanding and my assumptions, and again, is just me, it may be wrong, is that these are meant as a way to help this new entity stand up and sort of get on its feet. But what direction it actually takes is really going to be up to its members, and that will include the mission and its governance process over the long term.
Yeah, and just from my perspective, I think I agree with all the points I've said. I think it's going to be super flexible. But, one thing I would like to see how that shakes out, and again, like, this doesn't necessarily have a huge impact.
Gotcha, thank you.
Can you guys hear me, by the way?
Yes.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Just make sure. So from my perspective, I think from who is initially on there, and this is obviously not like a requirements by any means, but just speaking broadly, I think having like a diversified group of individuals with like diversified skill sets would be helpful, right? So somebody who's very strong at like the financial side of things, maybe somebody who's better at the governance side of things, maybe somebody who's good at, just DeFi in general, or whatever the skill set of this new DAO needs to take. Like, I think like thinking deeply about like what are the skill sets that you would want to have in those type of governors what would be, I think, a good starting point, I would imagine. Yeah, all good thoughts. I was going to get to Starfire's question, but does anybody else have any questions around, like, I guess, governance of Incubator DAO that were to go through, or anything from that perspective?
Maybe one last thing to highlight that's worth mentioning. It was outlined very briefly in the initial posts, but hasn't been brought up yet. Is obviously it would need multi-sig signers, and it would need SOFONs to initially kick things off. That is clearly subject to change based on the rules that the DAO decides. That's really up to the DAO at that point. But in order to kick things off, you need those as well, and those could be made up of some of the folks that are leading it or participating in it, that sort of thing. And we recommended that. Let's see. Let me scroll to it. I believe we recommended the magic number of maybe two folks that are SOFONs should not be on the multi-sig. Obviously those rules are kind of subject to change, based on the structure that folks want. But that's kind of a good rule of thumb there, is you want some SOFONs who aren't multi-sig signers.
Yeah, plus one to that, having segregation of duties and key controls like that and checks and balances is another good thing to consider here. But yeah, and before I get to Starfire's comment, anybody else have anything to say on this front?
Yeah, so on the financial side, like, I think I'd made this point before, but I actually can't remember where. But a lot of the templates for things are already laid out. This is the case with the Treasury side. This is the case with governance side. Obviously, all of these factors are malleable to the eventual kind of system that reaches consensus by the DAO. But that kind of framework is already there. So there are some materials that people can use. So if you read the quarterly reports or the Treasury reports or whatever, and you think this is good, but this could be done better by implementing X or removing Y, then like the ground is completely open to do that.
Yep, composable contracts in this space and composable governance too. So that's kind of the beauty of it. So yeah, good point, 50. Okay, well, stop me if anybody else wants to talk about the governance of or potential governance of the prospective Incubator DAO. But getting into Starfire's comment, I'm just going to read it here. I feel like there is a lack of representation for DAO members that want to remain associated with the tech in the event one of these proposals pass. Starfire, it looks like you're still here. I don't know if you want to kind of build on top of that or elaborate on that. Or if you're feeling a little shy, that's fine too. I think it's a good point. Like, there's definitely a large cohort of the community, especially a lot of the OGs who feel this way. I don't know if this proposal gets us closer. Again, I haven't been following it maybe as close as others, so maybe I'll let somebody else step in. And anybody have anything to say about how this potential proposal may impact this kind of mindset or these kind of needs? Not, I can give my speculation. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, here's my speculation again. Like, this doesn't represent really anybody's views probably. But like, because this is Incubator DAO, because the mission and vision of this is completely malleable and is not known, I would say there's a probably a fair chance that there's a large cohort of people that would be Rook holders that would want to continue, operating and doing things in the MEV space. So whether that's direct ownership over the tech or whatever word you want to use instead of ownership, I can't attest to that or speak to that, but I imagine that they can develop products that build on top of what we're trying to do. They could have active grants to kind of support the redistribution and democratization of MEV. So with that amount of capital and that amount of people who could be or are familiar with like what we have been trying to do, I think there is a probability that you could still feel like you're part of this movement, if you want to call it that. Again, like that's speculation. I don't know how it's going to shake out, and maybe people just want to do something completely different. Maybe they want to create an NFT project. But that's just speculation on my end.
From my end, I think determining the mission and vision is a critical part of this separation. Without those calibrating influences, we could set ourselves up for a lot of conflict that is otherwise avoidable. I do think that we are playing infinite coordination games with whatever we start this out with. And as such, we should be applying things like permaculture design principles to the Treasury's management and the ways that we design our infrastructure as we go forward, because that kind of mechanism design is baked in to creating a perpetuation of the game, which is what this DAO is getting ready to start incubating. And so I would like to encourage a mindset towards whatever those mission and vision points are, with that infinite game and sustainability and regenerative approaches in mind.
Anybody else have any thoughts on this front? Yeah, again, sorry, I don't know how much that answers your question or helped at all, but I don't necessarily have the answers here. But if you have any thoughts, I think again, everything is so malleable at this point to where I think you could probably have your thoughts potentially incorporated into whatever materializes, if anything materializes. So,
just to really quickly speak on how to provide exposure to the MEV narrative, how to provide exposure to the tech that Rook has. I think everyone's kind of coming to the realization that this is actually a way harder question than we had kind of originally envisioned. I can't thanks. I can't speak for everyone. I mean, I've only joined fairly recently, but I think that a larger trend in DeFi was that people took the assumption that we can just make a token fairly easily, and that's going to provide exposure, and that did work for a while, and that's really worked well for some DAOs. But I think what we're coming to now is this realization that this initial solution that worked is now having unforeseen consequences. Not to harp on like a lawyer, but the main one is the securities concerns. I know Guard has touched on that, and there's been some discussion around that. But yeah, this initial idea of we can just make a token and that's going to be intrinsically linked to the success of a protocol. I think that was probably the right deduction at first, but over time I think that has changed. And now we're in a position where I think everyone's realizing, this is actually way more complicated than we had originally imagined. So yeah, we are aware that this is a hard problem. We are definitely aware that people still want exposure to the Rook technology and the potential upside there. Our current thinking is, okay, how can we provide that in such a way that isn't going to land any of us in, court? Not to be flippant, but I think that is probably a good summary of the situation that we currently find ourselves in.
Cool. Thanks for that, 50. What else? What else you guys want? Anybody else have anything to say on the Incubator DAO, or maybe somebody wants to pivot to dissolution of the DAO or whatever else? I'll kind of open up the floor. I know we're not in the open floor section, but I guess on the topic of overall restructuring, whatever you want to call that, and what's been thrown around, does anybody have any strong thoughts or things they'd like to throw out there? Okay, it's obviously perfect and ready to go. Just kidding. Cool. Well, I think that was everything I had to say on that again, we can kind of enter the open floor section, and then we can kind of pivot back to the stablecoin and weekly treasury report items that you kind of see above. But yeah, just want to make sure that everybody has a chance to kind of put their thoughts out there. So moving into the open floor section, this is really like, think of it as open mic night. Whatever you want to say, throw it out there. If it's an initiative you'd like us to start looking into, if it's you want to yell at us a little bit, like here's your chance. So really whatever you would like to throw out there, or something you'd like to put on the agenda for next week or beyond that, this is also a great opportunity to get that on the table. Easy enough. Well, that was everything I had on the agenda outside of the stablecoin and the weekly treasury report. So if you guys came to kind of talk through some of these like bigger priority items, the incubator DAO, like feel free to dip on out if you'd like to stay and talk a little bit more about our stablecoin strategy and how we can better diversify and just create stability with our treasury. Definitely stick around for that one. We can also talk a little bit about our stablecoin framework and everything that's had in there and how we actually took that approach to analyzing that. And again, the goal of this is really to one, have a really in-depth research that we can kind of use to support future frameworks, but then also to develop proposals that like our like-kind KIP or like-kind asset KIP enable us to really come up with better processes and infrastructure for managing our treasury in ways that allow that weigh nimbleness and consensus between the different aspects of it. So we'll get into that. And then we'll also try to source some feedback. So 50, you want to kick things off with regards to the stablecoin framework and kind of where that stands for anybody who's wants to stick around?
Yeah, so the stablecoin document is, I would say, more or less done at this point. It probably just needs a couple of optics things, a couple more graphs thrown in there, and then it's probably done. I would ask anybody who is kind of up to date on the current stablecoin landscape to have a read and see if we've missed any important points or anything like that. I will warn you in advance that it's a big document. I think it's like 40 pages or something ridiculous. But we've tried to make it so all the information in there is relevant. So, if you do have some free time, then we would definitely appreciate comments on that. Also, it's probably going to be way, way, way more pages when whatever Arve's stablecoin is called drops, and then when Curve's stablecoin drops as well. So, it's probably going to end up like 80 pages.
Who would have thought stablecoins are the hottest thing in the market?
I know. That's what I was thinking. I was like, surely that would be the easiest thing to talk about, and then it just isn't at all.
Yeah, so just continue to talk high level, and again, this is similar to other proposals. This is completely malleable. Again, there's nothing binding about this research document. What the contents of it will be, we hopefully will create proposals that do create parameters and other types of binding things that interact with our treasury execution processes and treasury governance. So it will be important, but again, there's nothing binding about it right now. But overall, we really kind of look through the lens of, okay, we're not looking at stablecoins from a reward standpoint. Really, if you look at this, and I think we highlight this pretty well, is we really wanted to take a step back and focus on it from a risk perspective, because that really, in the end, your stablecoins, in my opinion, and maybe the people have different opinions, they're not there to increase the dollar amount of your treasury. That is a use case, but in the end, at least from a DAO that's developing very hard hitting, heavy intensive or capital intensive revenue streams like we're trying to do, we really want stablecoins to kind of be our saving grace and really be our stablecoin of our overall portfolio. And again, we heavily rely on those for runway. And obviously there's question marks around spend and runway and all that, but just focusing high level on the concepts. That's definitely my thinking. So we try to focus on really what's the stablecoin framework, stablecoin trilemma, and that's really focusing around what are the three main attributes that you can look at a stablecoin and maybe only pick two out of them that you kind of prioritize. And so that's really peg stability, capital efficiency, and decentralization. And we kind of get into analyzing each of those aspects for each stablecoin that we looked at. And for the most part, we really only looked at stablecoins that had TVL of greater than $1 billion. And then the other one we looked at, because of its kind of unique properties, was LUSD, just because of the immutability of it, and as well as it just kind of relying from a collateral perspective only on crypto native assets like ETH. So definitely we included that one as well. And again, very interesting. So yeah, again, and actually we included OUSD as well. So again, that is something that we find very appealing based on the conversations we've had. And so a lot of this will be used to create like kind of like a stablecoin whitelist to some degree. But I'll pause there. I've done a ton of talking. Anybody have any thoughts about stablecoin strategy, stablecoin research, really just anything stablecoin? Okay, easy enough. Well, I know 50 and I will work on finalizing this, and we'll package it up, and we'll have another executive summary that we can kind of share that kind of talks a little bit more about the results of these findings, as well as just publish a more formalized document. Then again, we'll kind of layer on the different proposals and different frameworks that kind of actually establish the parameters for us to operate within based off of this. So appreciate you guys hearing that out. And then I guess in the last 10 minutes or so, again, this will probably be a 0-minute conversation potentially, but just want to highlight it again that, we started this weekly Treasury report that just analyzes the weekly activity, the weekly financial position of the DAO, as well as some other topics, especially from a regulatory and stablecoin stability perspective. But always looking for, additional feedback and trying to make this a more and more robust document every time. Again, and you can kind of see this. The most recent one listed at the top of the agenda, but then just generally, like you can see kind of a Notion doc where we can kind of source some feedback as well. So always looking for that if anybody has anything. Okay, I am going to be out of my voice probably after this, but anybody else have anything they'd like to say before we kind of end things here? Okay, great. Well, really appreciate you guys stopping by for another great Treasury Tuesday. I think this was a productive conversation. Excited to kind of see where we go from here. But otherwise, again, thanks for the time and go enjoy your days and go touch some grass. Take care, everybody.
Thank you, sir. Goodbye.